Hello, my name is Sarah Edgar from Pretty Fabrics and Trims, and in this short video I'll be sharing how I like to needle turn applique dinky little hearts. I love adding little hearts to pieces of work. This is the page from the Happy Stitches Journal Volume 1 for February. As you can see, the hearts are quite small. The thread spool gives you an idea of the ratio of them. I also couldn't resist adding a little heart to the winter sampler from the Sew a Little Happiness Everyday series. So much so, I then went on and added one to spring, summer and autumn. Okay, so let's get started. You're going to need a heart template. This is my trusty little dinky cardboard one that I drew from a cereal box. You're also going to need a fabric marker which you can draw around. I use a Pilot Friction pen, which the ink disappears when you add heat. Word of caution, it can also come back when it gets very cold. So personally, I only ever use this pen when I'm going to be stitching directly on top of the line or folding on the line, so you won't see it. You'll also need some thread. My go-to thread for applique is Oracle 80 weight, which is an extremely fine thread. You'll also need some specialist applique needles. These are mine, and these are a long, fine and very sharp needle. Okay, so once you've drawn around your heart, you'll now need to cut it out. Now, the general rule of thumb is that you use a scant 1/4 inch seam. Now, the smaller the applique, the smaller you want the seam. So this is a very scant 1/4 inch seam that I'm cutting out here. So just cut around the outside edge. As you can see, I've just taken away the excess fabric on the bottom point there of the heart. Then place it onto your background fabric and pin it in place. You can get applique glues, but I like to use these tiny little applique pins by Clover. Okay, you're then ready to get stitching. Now, with your thread, the general rule of thumb is that you match the thread to your applique fabric rather than the background fabric. When I start sewing, I like to start on a straight area. So as you can see, I'm going to start on the side edge here. And to make it a little easier, I also like to finger press along this seam line. It just makes it a little bit easier when it comes to needle turning. So I've put a knot in the end of my thread and I've brought it in just through the applique fabric at the moment, then turned over the seam, and I use a mix of my fingers and thumbs and nail and also the end of the needle. And then the idea is that you want to make tiny little stitches that literally go through the backing fabric and come back up into the applique, but you just want to nip the edge of the applique fabric. The idea is that the smaller you stitch, the more discreet it's going to be. And that's the benefit of also using an 80 weight thread, because it is so fine that it really does make your stitches disappear. You can of course use your favourite thread. I for many years used a 50 weight Oracle thread and I was perfectly happy. But the 80 weight just adds an element of loveliness to your stitching. So as you can see, I'm making lots of little stitches that are simply coming up and oops, I just got caught in my pincushion there, nipping the applique fabric. And then I'm moving around the curved edge, and you'll find that the fabric will just go with you on that outer curve. As you can see, the ivory thread that I'm using here, which is my favourite 2311, just disappears into the fabric. What I thought it would be quite useful was to actually show you the stitching using a darker thread, so you could maybe see how small I do like to make the stitches. So here we go, I've now switched to a dark thread, and hopefully you still won't see my stitches, but it will maybe enable you to see just how tiny I do try to make my little stitches. So I'm using the end of my needle, and I tend to use my thumb nail just to help move the fabric as well. And then I'm going up and I'm just making the stitches and working round, and I'm trying to keep the fold of the fabric on the drawn line. So it does get a little bit tricky, and it's certainly not a quick process, but then that's the joy of doing needle turn applique, that it does take time. And it's a really hands-on process, and I love it. I think you just feel so relaxed. Now what I'm doing here, I've got a pair of scissors, and can you see I'm just going to snip into that point where at the top of the heart, and I'm going to continue now with my needle to fold over the fabric. Now this is the trickiest bit, and it is quite a steep little angle that I'm trying to stitch here. I'm never going to get entirely into that point, so I'm just going to try and stitch as close as I can. So at the moment I'm just going to carry on going round the curve, following my drawn line. So just continue to use your needle and your finger if you find that easier, and tuck under the seam, and just keep making lots of tiny little stitches, and sort of keep them as close to the stitching line, the drawn line, as possible. And then we're going to go down as far as we can, folding the fabric into this deep curve, and then I'm going to make another little tight stitch here. Okay, so you can see how I've turned under the fabric on that drawn line, so you can't really see it. So any residue that is there, I will just press at the end and it will disappear. Okay, so now working my way back up, and again I'm just going to finger press along that seam line, as it really does make the whole process easier. And you can see here there is a bit too much of the fabric zone, so I'm just going to snip it just a little bit more and turn it under with my needle. And if you're worrying about it coming unstitched or the thread showing, don't worry, just do lots of little stitches and it will hold the fabric in place. So here we go, I'm just doing a few more stitches, working on getting that nice V in the heart. Okay, and then we're going to move back around the second half of the heart. If you want to see some photos of this process, if you pop over to my blog, a little happy place. There is a dedicated post all about needle turn applique, and there's also an alternative version where I use freezer paper as a template rather than drawing the heart on, and you might find that easier because you keep the paper on there until you finish stitching, and it gives you something to fold against and work against. So there are different ways of doing a job. It's all about finding the right way for you. And if needle turn applique isn't for you, then you could do the interfacing method where you use your sewing machine to help you do the appliques, and then literally just sort of stitch them on by hand at the end. Again, pop over to the blog, there's a full tutorial on that method. And Bondaweb is a wonderful thing, and that enables you to do raw edge applique. So there really isn't a right or wrong, just go with what works for you and what you enjoy. Okay, so here I am, I'm going to keep going around the outside edge, and I'm working my way down to the bottom point. Can you see where I've finger creased it? It just makes it so much easier to turn the fabric with your needle. Now I'm just doing a bigger section there so I can whiz along. Another loose thread, so I'm just pulling that away. Okay, right, I'm getting close now to the bottom point of the heart. Now, what you'll need to do here is to tuck under the fabric. Now, you might find that it will tuck under naturally on its own, or you can, as I'm doing here, fold under the fabric, then tuck under the sides. And then if you just push it down with your finger to crease it, and then hold it in place, and then literally just finish stitching the heart. We're almost there. Been a bit pernickety here and just trying to get the fabric folded on my line as much as I possibly can, and then I'm just gonna go back up to where I started. There we are. Then I'm knot off my thread on the back. So pin removed, and there we go. There's my needle turn heart.